Hello everyone, my name is Bettina Scheumer and I'm part of the product management team for database security here at Oracle. I would like to spend the next 30 minutes with you to share how you can streamline the security for your Oracle databases with Oracle DataSafe, both on the cloud and on premises. Customers rely on databases to manage their most critical asset, the data. But if this data is not well protected, it can become a big liability. If you just look at the number of data breaches from last year, we can see that the number of incidents has almost doubled compared to 2019. Hackers, as well as internal attackers, will exploit any weaknesses or gaps in your security posture to steal your data. If you're using the Autonomous database, the database is already taking care of some of these security aspects, encrypting all the data by default, applying all relevant security patches, or making sure that the administrator cannot snoop into actual data. But there are still aspects that only you can take care of. You need to make sure your database is configured securely, that there are no unknown changes to your configuration. You need to have an understanding of your users and what they're doing in the database. You need to decide which activities you want to audit. You need to have an understanding what sensitive information you're storing in your database and where it is stored, and ultimately how you can minimize the exposure of such sensitive information. To help you with these tasks, we have introduced Oracle DataSafe. DataSafe is providing a unified control center for database security in the Oracle Cloud infrastructure, allowing you to monitor all your Oracle databases, no matter where they reside, in the cloud or on premises. With DataSafe, you can quickly identify risk around the configuration of your database, database users, and the data stored in your database. And the best part, there is no special security expertise needed to get immediate insight into any potential risk. DataSafe offers 5 important security capabilities, with security assessment, user assessment, activity auditing, sensitive data discovery, and data masking. Now let's look closer into those capabilities. First off, we have database security assessment. It assesses your security configurations, identifying areas where you can reduce risk, and gives you recommendations on how to remediate the risk. No matter if you're developing a new application, if you're spinning up a new database in your network or in the cloud, or if you're moving a database to the cloud, you need to make sure that your database is securely configured and that you're not taking any unnecessary risks. One of the biggest factors in a data breach are system misconfigurations. And the Oracle database has hundreds of settings that impact security, and DataSafe Security Assessment checks those settings for you and gives actionable recommendations on ways to make the system more secure. You get a comprehensive report that helps you understand the potential risks, highlights findings related to GDPR, the Center of Internet Security, and the Technical Implementation Guide, and gives you remediation steps for each risk. You can also set a baseline with the configuration you want. When DataSafe runs a next assessment, it will compare it automatically against the baseline you configured and lets you know if something has changed. The comparison then shows you the details of what has changed. You can also set up notifications, for instance by email, whenever there are any changes detected. Let's have a look at security assessment in the system. So here in DataSafe, you can find security assessment under the Security Center. And what you can see here in security assessment is an overview of all the risks identified across your databases in your landscape. So here, for instance, you can see we have some high risk in 10 of our databases. We have discovered some medium risk in 19 of our databases, and so on. You also see where those high risks were identified. We have some concerning user accounts, privileges and roles, and so on. If we want to look into the details, we're just selecting the high risks here. And then we get an overview of all the high risk findings across our databases. And as you can see here, we have 29 findings across 17 risks. If I scroll down here, you can see exactly what are those risks that were identified. So let's open up some examples here, for instance, case-sensitive passwords. So you can see there are some more explanations on what the risk is. And we see we have one database that is impacted by that risk, OCI EBS. So if I click on that database, we get more details specifically for that database. And here you can see we're recommending case-sensitive passwords. They're not used in this database. So you see here the parameter is set to false. We're recommending setting it to true. And again, you get more information on the risk here. And then also where this recommendation is coming from, in this case, from the Center of Internet Security. Let's look at another risk. Here's another example, system privileges granted to public. So let's check that. So we see there are some databases where system privileges were granted to public, which means to all database users. And you see the databases that are impacted by this risk. And if I click on one of the databases, then we see exactly what's happening here. So here you can see there was select any table granted to the public, which means now basically all our databases can look at any database table in our system. And again, you get more information here under remarks and then also where the recommendation is coming from. Another way of looking at the risk is by database. So you see here next to the risk summary, we also have a target summary. If I click on that, I get the target specific reports. So here at a glance, I see for the databases in my compartment that I have selected here now, I have a few that deviate from the baseline. I see when they were last assessed, and I can access a report from here. So let me show you the report first. So here now I get also the summary table, which shows me, where those risks were identified, if there are any. And then down below, I get all the checks here, all the details of what was checked in my database. Let's concentrate on the risks first. So I deselect advisory and evaluate. Just want to look at high, medium, and low risk. And you see we have the system privileges granted to public. That's the risk we saw earlier on the other overview. We saw we have broad data access privileges, also a high risk here. That is actually related to my select any table here. And then I also have additional low risk here that I can analyze further. Now this one also said that it differed from the baseline. So what I can do now, I can compare it with the baseline. And it shows me exactly what has changed. So we see we have some modifications here compared to the baseline. And here below I get the details. So for instance, the grant of select any table to public is now new. So that was not in my baseline. Someone has changed that. So now I can take necessary steps. I can either remove that grant or, go back to the old baseline. Or if this would have been an acceptable risk, I can also set this assessment now as a new baseline. Good, with that, let's look into the next feature. So the next feature is user risk assessment. Another major contributor to data breaches are compromised accounts, especially if they're highly privileged. So user risk assessment now evaluates our database users, checking their privileges, and even letting you view the user's database activity. You can get an immediate overview of the risk levels for the database users across your databases. You can see how many users are categorized as posing a potential critical, high, medium, or low risk. You can also see at a glance how many and which users have privileged roles when they last changed their password or when they last logged in. You can then review any highly privileged users and decide if there are any actions necessary. That could include revoking some of the privileges or maybe configuring higher levels of auditing for those users. Similar to security assessment, you now also have the option to set a baseline for existing user accounts and their privileges. Every new user assessment is then compared to the set baseline, allowing you to easily identify any newly added users and their privileges, as well as any entitlement changes for existing user accounts. Okay, with that, let's also check user assessment in the DataSafe system. So you find it also under Security Center, now under user assessment. And here what you can see is the overview across all my databases. Right now I have a compartment selected, including the child compartments. I can also select the root compartment here, including the child compartments. And it now shows me all the database user assessments that I have authorizations for. So here I can see I have users that are categorized as posing a potential critical risk, high risk, medium, low, and so on. And similar to what we've done for security assessment, I can now drill down, look at the critical users. I get more information here on those critical users, which of those have a DBA role, how many of them, DV admin role, audit admin role, when they last changed their password, when they last logged in. And then below I get the details for all these users. I have admin users here, not so surprising that they are highly privileged, but let's also look at some other users. So here you can see I also have some DBA users, DBA Deborah, for instance, in the DSATP01. That's the database we looked at before. So let me analyze this here. And here now what I can see is I can drill down into all the system privileges and roles and grants that they have. So unlimited table space here, but let's also check the roles. Okay, She has resource, she has connect, and then PDB, DBA, which obviously has a lot of grants coming from the role. So you can scroll down and you see exactly all the authorizations this user has on the database. If you feel like, I'm not so familiar with this user, I'm not sure what they're doing on the database, you can check that here as well. So you can go to View Activity and then check the database activity of this user, but I'll come to that a little bit later. So also here in user assessment, we also have the target view. So if I click on target summary, now I see my databases, all my databases listed here. Let me go back to our compartment to see a little bit smaller list. And then for those databases, I see exactly if they deviate from the baseline, yes or no. I see when they were last assessed, and I can also view the report here. So here in this database, the DS-ATP01, I see I have 22 users. I see again, I have 11 that are marked as critical risk, 1 as medium, 5 high, and so on. I see how many have DBA or privileged roles. I see when they last changed their password, when they last logged in. And I have the details here of all the users below. And again, I can just check them. So let's check DBA Harvey here, for instance. He has privileges, system privileges here, and also some roles as well. So in user assessment, let me also show you how the comparison report looks like. So if I go back here to our target summary, I can see that for some of my databases, the latest assessment differs from the baseline. So let's check the DS-ATP01 again. First, I'll look at the report, and then you have here the compare with baseline. So let's do that real quick. In the comparison report, I now see that some of my users were changed. So I had some existing users where something has changed. I have a new user, and also I have one user that was deleted. So the existing user here, for instance, Lestrange, I can see that the risk level has increased. It used to be categorized as a high risk. Now it's categorized as a critical risk. The same for Malfoy. Then I have a new user here, Bettina, which is also categorized as critical. And I have, as I said, one user, Eva Rich, that is now deleted. Let's first check the new user. If I open up the details, I see now it's a new user. Then I can see the user is categorized as critical. And because this is a new user that now has a PDB DBA role, you can see all the modified grants down here. And obviously, it's a lot of new grants coming from the PDB DBA role. I can also check one of the users that was modified. You see there are some modified grants and also some added grants that was added to this user. If I want to analyze these users further, I can always go back to the user assessment details and select my user, for instance, Bettina, the newly created user, and then check exactly the system privileges and the roles with all the grants that were granted to this user. If you want to set a new baseline, that is also very simple. You just go up here. Let's assume this is a new baseline you want to set. You just hit the Set as Baseline button here. You can also select an assessment from the history. If you click on View History, select the one that you want to make the new baseline, and then say Set Baseline here. Once the baseline is set, all new assessments will now be compared against the baseline that we just configured here. Good, let's come back to our slides. So the next feature I want to talk about is user activity auditing. DataSafe helps you implement effective audit and alert policies. The user activity auditing here allows you to easily enable and provision audit settings that follow proven best practices. DataSafe then monitors database activity by collecting the audit data from your databases for analysis, reporting, and alerting. We also have predefined reports as well as very flexible analysis capabilities, so you can quickly drill down into the activity, helping you to understand who did what and when on the database. You also need to make sure, especially when it comes to audit data, you need to make sure you follow any company policy or regulation and keep your audit records for the required time. How long you need to keep your audit records can be very different from industry to industry or company to company. The audit data retention management in DataSafe allows you to configure the period based on your needs. You can keep the records for up to 1 year online in DataSafe, and we also offer an additional 6 years in an archive. So that gives you a total of 7 years. But if you have any requirements to keep them even longer, then we can also accommodate that. You can, of course, retrieve the data from the archive at any time and use it for analysis in DataSafe. You can set the retention period globally for all your databases, or you can also set them individually for each database. But once you defined how long you want to keep them, DataSafe takes care of the rest. Let's look at activity auditing in the system. So here what we can see at a glance is, first of all, which of my databases have enabled any audit policies. And you can see here I have, for all 3 of them, I have some kind of audit policies enabled. Basic admin activity, some additional policies, compliance standards are enabled on most of my databases. I have one database that also tracks any user activity for specific users. If you want to learn more, you just click on the database name here. And that gives you the details which of the audit policies are enabled. You can see I'm tracking right now critical database activity, login events, schema changes, admin activity. I'm specifically monitoring 2 users with the DS$admin and the HCM1. I also have some custom policies here and some other Oracle predefined policies that I have enabled. If you have a database that don't have any audit policies enabled, and you click on here, DataSafe will give you recommendations on what you should enable. Besides audit policy, we also have predefined alert policies that you can see here. And as you can see, the predefined ones are profile changes, failed logins by admin users, schema changes, entitlement changes, and so on. And you can see we also have audit policy changes, which is not enabled on my database right now. So I really want to have this as well. So let me enable it, and then you just provision it to the database. Once this is enabled and once you have started the audit collection in DataSafe, you can then use our predefined reports to analyze the data. As you can see, we have a list of predefined reports here that you can look at. We also have the all activity where you have additional filters that you can set to look at the data that you're interested in. So for instance, let's say we want to look at a certain database, then we can do that here. We can set a filter, select the target, and say we only want to look at, for instance, DSATP02. Apply the filter, and it's now selecting for the filter that we have defined here. If you look at the filters, there are quite a few values that you can set here. You know, you can look for specific objects or specific audit types, operation times, etc. So you can really narrow down the search that you're looking at. You also can add additional columns here. So you see the list of columns here. So let's say we want to also see the SQL text of any of the changes. So that will be shown here as well. You can always change the reports here, but you can also save them then as a new report. So next time you don't have to set any additional filters anymore. The other features I would like to talk about are around sensitive information. So first off is sensitive data discovery. To make sure you're not exposing any sensitive information, you first need to understand what type of information you're storing in your database. You can then review the sensitive data and decide which of the data needs to be protected. The sensitive data discovery makes it easy to find and identify any sensitive data. We have over 150 sensitive data types out of the box, but you can also add your own data types. You get also a comprehensive report on where your sensitive data is stored, in which schemas, tables, and columns, and you can always come back and make adjustments to include additional columns or also to remove certain columns from masking later on. As I mentioned, we deliver over 150 sensitive data types, and those are in the 7 categories you can see here, from personal data or financial information to healthcare records. And as you can see, we have names, email addresses, passport, driver license, credit card numbers, health information, salaries, etc. But if you have any company-specific identifiers or anything else you want to discover, you can easily create your own sensitive types as well. Let me show you how easy sensitive data discovery is in DataSafe. So here I'm now selecting the database that I want to analyze, and let's assume DSATP01 is my production database. What I'm doing is I'm creating a sensitive data model. I can give that a name, DBW for DB World. I can show some sample data. So this will help me identify any false positives that I might find. And I need to select the compartment where I want to store the model. Here now you can then select if you want to either analyze your entire database or if you want to scan just certain schemas. In my case here, I know that my application data is stored under the HCM1 schema, so let me use this one. And then here you can define which sensitive data categories you want to look at. If I open those up, you see then exactly what is underneath here. So national identifiers, for instance, US Social Security number, national identifiers, portable citizen card, and so on. You see there are different country versions here. We have public identifiers with names, email address, phone numbers, and so on. What I'm typically recommending is that you're just looking for all the sensitive information here, for all categories. And as you can see also in the bottom here, I also created my own category where I included where I created my own sensitive type for a custom department ID. Once the data discovery is done, I'm getting a report here on where it found sensitive information. As you can see, it found sensitive information in all these categories here. I can expand them all. And then you see some examples here. We found a tax ID number in those two tables here. We found a first name, last name, email address in the employees table. Let me scroll down here. We also found address data in the locations table. We found more information on IT information with user IDs. We found credit card numbers here in the payment account number, and so on. So here now you can make either changes if you want to. So if you see something where you're like, oh, this is not so critical. So let's say this is an insurance claim here. I don't really care for that. You can always take it off your list here. You can also add additional columns if you want to your model here by adding the columns here. If you're anything like me, then yes, the category view is nice, but you're probably more familiar with your data dictionary. So you can also change the view here to the schema view. And then you get the details here by schema name, tables, and then the columns in which we found sensitive information. You see here what type of information we found. You also see the sample data here. As I said, this will help in identifying any false positives we might find. And you can then remove those columns from the model. You can also always come back to the report. This is stored then in the DataSafe library. And the report also shows you how many values we found, in how many tables, in how many columns the data was found. And then if I expand it all, this is the information you saw earlier in the data discovery that is also stored here in the report. Once we know where sensitive information is stored and you identified which data needs to be protected, data masking can then help you masking this data in your non-production databases. For instance, if you're taking a copy for development, testing, or training purposes, it's always a good recommendation to replace the sensitive information with masked data with the help of sensitive data masking here in DataSafe before you let any users onto the database. DataSafe comes with over 50 predefined masking formats, both generic and specific masking formats. They're, for instance, masking formats for email addresses or social security numbers, making sure that after the data is masked, it still looks like, let's say, a social security number or an email address. And we also have generic masking formats like random date, random names, fixed strings, group masking, etc. And what is important to understand is that for all predefined sensitive data types that I showed you earlier, DataSafe automatically selects the right masking format by default. So there's no coding required from your side. But you can also make changes to the selected masking formats, or you can also create your own masking formats if necessary. So let's check out masking in the system as well. So we had the DS-ATP01, which is our production environment. We already identified the sensitive information, stored it in a sensitive data model. And now let's assume we made a copy of our production environment. The new database is DS-ATP02. We want to use this for training purposes, but now we have to mask the data first. What we're doing is we're also creating a new masking policy because we haven't done that yet. And let me call that here as well, dbw. We're actually not creating a new model, but we're picking the one from the library that we just created. So here is the sensitive data model that we created, and we're using that. Because we just did it, we don't have to verify it or update it. And here we can now see the masking policy that DataSafe created automatically. So here you see the categories again. Let me expand that. And then for all the columns that we saw earlier, it gives me a masking format that it will use to mask the data. So we can see our taxpayer IDs will be masked with a masking format called US Social Security number. For names, we're using random names, an email address, phone number, random names here again. We have a credit card number here that we're using. But if you want to make changes, that's always possible. So you can always go in here, make changes to the masking format that it's using. Or what you can also do is you can go in and select a different masking format here from the drop-down list. Once you're okay with all the settings, we just have to confirm the policy. And then we can decide if we want to run the masking job right now, or we can also schedule it for later, and then just review it and submit it. So if you decide to use DataSafe, you can monitor all your Oracle databases, no matter where they're running, either in the cloud or on premises. For your cloud databases like Autonomous Databases or Exasys or Database Cloud Service, DataSafe is already included. The same applies for your Exadata Cloud at Customer databases. You just have to register the database and you get immediate insight into any potential risks. You can also monitor your on-premises databases or databases on compute, and that applies for both Standard and Enterprise Edition. And for all databases, we're including 1 million audit records per database per month. So to summarize, DataSafe simplifies managing the security posture of your databases. You get immediate visibility into any risk around your database configuration, users, and the data, all in a single, easy-to-use control center with no special security expertise needed, allowing you to leverage the most complete set of proven database security capabilities. And I hope you will all try it out if you're not already using it. If you want to get your hands on DataSafe, please visit our Live Labs, which offers a workshop that guides you through all the features of DataSafe in easy-to-follow steps. And if you want to learn more about the capabilities I showed you today, please visit our homepage or check the documentation. Thank you.